Joining me for all the conversation today, I'm delighted to say, is Philip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer. Thank you, as always, for joining us on a Thursday.
Good morning. It's nice to be here again.
So much to talk about. I'm going to put the question out to people right now before we start talking, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. After the Southport attack, 3 children dead, 8 other children horrifically injured. We've got fatal stabbings of children. Last week, a 14-year-old stabbed to death in broad daylight on a bus. Yesterday, so on Monday, we learned about it on Tuesday. On Tuesday, so we learned about it on Wednesday. Because, by the way, these things happen so often, it's difficult to keep up with the days. Yeah,
it's shocking.
That tells me everything. A 12-year-old stabbed to death, a 14-year-old under arrest. Question: how do we tackle knife crime? Because I'm not sure the government's got a good plan on this.
No.
Certainly don't think the London Mayor Sadiq Khan has a good plan on this. Is it just lots more rules about buying a knife online? Because I'm not sure that is it. Yeah, I don't want people to be able to buy 10-foot machetes, but, how do we actually tackle knife crime? Because I've got a funny feeling it's kind of about the people more than it is about the actual weapons. I'd love to hear from you. 0344 499 1000 is a number to call. You can text us the word talk, then your message to 87222. You can get in touch on X at TalkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1 standard network rate message. Philip, as we wait, in an hour's time we're going to be hearing the judge talking at Liverpool Crown Court, Mr Justice Goose. How do we tackle knife crime?
Well, that's the $6 million question, I think. I think we need to start to bring back in some responsibility in society, and we should bring in parental responsibility. If a child leaves a house with a knife, the parent should know that that child has got a knife or something that could cause harm.
I think sometimes they do know.
Well, if they do know, then the parents are as culpable as the child. And yeah. I think if we started to get harsh, and if a child is arrested for committing a crime with a knife, the parent should be arrested as well for lack of care of the child, and then they have to disprove.
I mean, you say parents. Realistically, we know in most of these cases there isn't a dad around. Certainly not in the home. Yeah. I do think, we are really going to have to talk about that. We're also going to have to talk about how often these cases involve children from certain different backgrounds, certain different communities. I don't know about you. I haven't read a story about a whole spate of children from Chinese families.
Yeah.
Who are doing this. There are certain communities where this is happening. In London, it's Afro-Caribbean.
Yeah.
Not West African. It's not a colour thing. Yeah. Afro-Caribbean, lack of dads, 45% single parent family. Not having a go at the mums, but where's dad? Although people need to, I'm sorry, the single best thing you can do for your child is to bring them up with mum and dad in the same house. That is the single best thing you can do for them. We need to talk about going back to basics on a lot of this stuff, don't we?
Yeah.
They're being failed by family, they're being failed by schools, they're being failed by social workers, they're being failed by police, slaps on hands, a little bit of shoplifting here, a little bit of drug dealing here, then you've got a knife, the gang. But also, children, there are lots of children who go to school in the morning carrying a knife because they're absolutely terrified of the gang in their local neighbourhood. Why are we not stopping that from happening? Do we not have the wherewithal to stop that?
And what most of those kids who are carrying a knife because they're scared of that don't realise is that there's a greater chance that they're going to get stabbed by their own knife if they pull it. And this is where it is a cultural thing, it is a society thing, it is a community thing. And if there aren't the fathers there, then there needs to be some form of support for the mothers. There needs to be increase in community support. There needs to be. I remember when I was at school, if someone came in with something that the rest of us thought was a bit dodgy in whatever it was, we would turn around and say, "Oi!" and remove it from them so that they didn't get into trouble and we didn't get into trouble if we were caught in the periphery of what was going on. We need to bring that back into society again.
I think we need to bring shame into society. I mean, we heard about the 14-year-old who was stabbed on the bus the other week, and again, he was in gangs. He was in gangs. He carried a knife into school, the week earlier or the day earlier. I mean, people go, he's wrong and he's written off. He'd been in care for a few years. He'd been in care from from secondary school onwards, and then he'd left care and he'd been living on the streets. Yeah. He was covered in tattoos. His mum was. She'd obviously completely unable to keep control of this kid. Yeah. Said gangs had got to him. Now you can say, well, mum, you should have been there. Well, yeah, but mum failed. But when mum fails, when dad fails, when mum fails, someone else
something else
needs to
pick,
be
pick
there.
it
Others,
up.
you know.
Yeah.
And again, the Axel Rudakabana case, we know that the father feared the son was going to try and commit a massacre, you know, at his old high school where he'd been expelled for violence, for carrying a knife, for using a bat to, you know, to a hockey stick, sorry, to beat children, and you know, desperately trying to stop him from getting in a taxi and going to the school. You know, so even parents who are trying to do the right thing, I mean, we don't know don't know how much the parents are have to take responsibility for this. But they again, if we've had parents again and again saying, I went to the authorities, I begged them to do something, he's referred to prevent 3 times, nothing happens. There is obviously such an abject failure of people falling through the cracks.
Yep.
What do you make of this idea that whole, you know, the terrorism definition needs to be widened? Because lots of concern that actually that just stretches resources even further.
I think this is another rabbit hole that's been thrown out there for people to jump down. You know, you only identify the motivation of someone who carries out an attack after they've carried out the attack and after you do the investigation. You know, beforehand, whenever someone is planning a mass killing, whether it be a lone individual, whether it be a group of individuals, you don't know whether their motivation is terrorist motivation or something else. So there's nothing wrong with if something gets flagged up, it going into the same resources that would be looking after lone wolf terrorists, so that you're stopping a mass attack and the police can coordinate things together. Changing the definition, I don't think is a bad thing. I don't think
unless there are extra resources.
But I don't think there are thousands of people out there that are going to suddenly come onto the police radar in dealing with this thing. And at the moment, the police have got 900 people in 900 investigations into 3,000 people actively today on terrorism issues. Another 200 to 300 on top of that it's going to impact resources, but not massively if it saves lives, because you can bring more national resources to monitoring an individual and force different agencies to have to come together. If.
What do you make of the calls from, you know, Nigel Farage and people like that saying that Angela Rayner needs to apologise for suggesting the South, well, she's not suggesting, she stated the Southport attacks were not terror-related. The Deputy Prime Minister claimed Nigel Farage, when he did his video back in the summer saying he believes that, you know, we're not being given the full story. She accused him of spreading fake news after he questioned whether the tragedy was linked to terrorism. I mean, he had an Al-Qaeda and was making rice. You know, she was very, very, very clear, you know, that this was, she said he must understand you have a level of responsibility. You're a community leader. You're elected to represent your constituency. It's not your level of responsibility not to stoke up what conspiracy theories or what you think might happen or lead into what you think. We want, you know, and she was very, very clear that it absolutely wasn't a terrorist attack. I mean, you know, as he pointed out, he was right all along. When he was it was a terror attack.
He wasn't, and she's dancing.
But we were being lied to.
Yeah, and she's dancing in the head of a pin to mislead, and that's what she's doing.
And she would have known as well.
And she will have known, and this is where Keir Starmer's a lawyer. I've had to deal with some very sensitive things in intelligence gathering with lawyers. And you find that there's 2 types. There's a disabling lawyer who will always say, no, you can't, no, you can't, no, you can't. Yeah. And then there's an enabling lawyer, and they're the ones that go, I understand what you're trying to do. Here's a way of doing it within the law. Yeah. Starmer is a disabling lawyer, and that, unfortunately, is most of them.
He's a computer says no lawyer, isn't he? Absolutely. Can we also talk about the extraordinary story, the front page of the Telegraph? They got through Freedom of Information requests, basically from... It's the most bizarre thing. It's a study carried out by Thames Water, an academic study, basically trying to see, look, what are our actual needs for supplying water? Because we need this whole thing. When you're building houses, you're building roads, you're supplying electricity, gas, water, and hospitals and everything else. You need to know how many people there are in the country. It's one of the reasons why we have a census every 10 years, so we actually know how many people are here. It's very, very crucial. They've discovered the most extraordinary thing. Are you surprised by this? That we have up to 1 in 12 people in the capital city, they believe, is an illegal migrant. 1 in 12. As many as 585,000 illegal migrants are illegal here. So something like 60% of the 1 million people who they believe to be illegal migrants in this country, largely people not who've come across on those migrant boats, but people who have come here legally on a tourist visa, on a study visa, or a work visa, but have overstayed. Now, I would suggest the figure is probably double that. Yep. And one of the reasons I would suggest that is because when they had applications from EU citizens to stay post-Brexit, to apply for their legal, you know, if you've been here for a number of years, you can apply to stay. No one's throwing you out. We're just going to limit rights to people coming in the future. Turned out there were 2 million more EU citizens in the country legally than we knew about. What are the odds that we know less about legal migrants than illegal migrants? There are so many people now living in this country. I mean, estimates 1.5, possibly 2 million people living here, using resources, going to A&E, going to a doctor, kids at school who have no right to be here. I know the numbers aren't as extreme as what we've seen in America. 11 million people they think have crossed the Mexican border in just the last 4 years. But given we're a smaller country with a smaller population, that's a huge number of people. And when I look around, the number of people begging on the streets, harassing you in the street now. I'm thinking, yeah, that figure is probably an underestimate.
Yeah, and we hear of the government sending more people back to their home countries. They're not sending the illegal migrants that are coming across the channel back. They're sending people that they catch with this visa side of things. But it highlights something that we have in British society where we don't know the reality of what's going on.
Yeah.
I got an answer to Freedom of Information Act request yesterday on how many non-British personnel are MPs in Parliament, and Parliament doesn't know.
Or MPs, or working for MPs?
No, who are elected MPs in Parliament, and they don't know. They allow Irish citizens and Commonwealth citizens from certain areas to be members of Parliament, but they don't know how many don't have a British passport, are not British citizens. They don't have that data. If they don't have that data, then of course they're not going to know.
Of course they're not going to know who's working in a local nail bar or garage.
Exactly.
Or the local Deliveroo driver.
Yeah.
I know, I just find it extraordinary. And again, we know what's happening with Donald Trump, and we know that the bleeding heart, even if you're watching BBC and Sky and everyone else, they've already started the bleeding heart stuff. I mean, quite apart from, the stuff on DEI and recognition of biological reality, only two genders. But the sort of, it's awful, all these people, and these people who are going to be deported. What, the people who've come illegally going to be made to go back to their own countries? This is not
funny.
Controversial. There's controversial legislation. This is not controversial to the vast majority of people.
Yeah.
It's quite extraordinary.
It is. It's protecting the American taxpayer from...
But also they're saying, but quite a people are saying, you know what, all these people, these jobs, they're the people who are picking the fruit, they're the people who are delivering your takeaway, these are the people washing up in the restaurants, and when people have to start paying, I actually genuinely heard somebody, an American reporter on BBC yesterday saying, and when people actually start realising, American citizens, how much more they're going to have to pay for things. Yeah, because people are being paid illegally to work below legal wages, normal wages. And guess what? When they can't hire those people, employers are going to have to hire Americans and boost their wages. Things are going to cost more, but Americans will be paid more. And that's exactly what happens here. Yeah. And when we actually kind of close the border a bit, when we did actually do a bit of that post-Brexit, for a little bit, lockdown, we did actually see, what a funny thing, wages rose because employers couldn't pay a load of people off the books. And
what it's doing is it's getting rid of what's effectively slavery in the United States.
Yes.
It's getting rid of the illegal gangs that are controlling it, so it's going to impact crime on the streets and everything else. And it is happening here in exactly the same way.
Absolutely. So much more I want to talk about, including, especially with your expertise in the military, over what Putin's spy ships are doing. Also, Keir Starmer vowing to override the whims of NIMBYs. We'll see about that. I actually agree with him on some stuff.